Hello, welcome to Back to the City. I'm Simon Calder, and today I'm very excited to be joined by Willow Waters, ahead of the release of The Friction I Demand at the Cedar Cultural Centre on Thursday, the 4th of May. This is a record with your full band, the Earth Tones.
Yep.
Let's begin by focusing on, I think the band name is so
Sure.
appropriate.
Yeah.
For this band and this record. And there's a metaphor in the band bio that you shared of the band being like the countless, or the music being like the countless variegated hues of a landscape. Could you kind of expand on that metaphor a little bit and how it relates to the band name, the Earth Tones?
Sure. Yeah, I think music for me has always been a very synesthetic thing. Like when I think of sound or hear sound, I connect it with a visual component and sort of a tactile component. And so, yeah, whenever I'm writing songs, I have sort of a vision of a landscape or a place or a color or a feeling. And so, yeah, when putting together the band, that was kind of part of what I was envisioning, is just like different textures, different colors coming together to create a larger picture.
There's a reference in the opening track to the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
And I think that opening track with the lyric, "Take me down to the bottom of the ocean, take me down below," the track with that descending piano line, which is you, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm playing piano on that one.
Really does. The song does what it narrates, taking us down into the belly of this beast.
Yeah, so it got that drawing down feeling to it.
The journey that we're going on is somewhat of a dark night of the soul, but in the album description it says a dark night of the soul has never felt this groovy.
Yeah, Carlisle, one of the singers in the band, wrote that album description, and thought it was
It's
very,
excellent.
very
Yeah,
fitting.
one of three vocalists besides you.
Yep, along with Emily Castrol, Sister Species, and Alexander Griffin, good friend of mine.
So what is the significance of the fact that this record takes us on this journey into the belly of the beast through we're going on a journey that's the dark night of the soul, and yet it is groovy. The dark night of the soul has never felt this groovy. That seems really key.
There's sort of a juxtaposition or a contrast, or like a holding two things at once through this album of like, yeah, feeling deep grief and moving through kind of the darker spaces of life, of existing, but then simultaneously like understanding or feeling the sun on the back of your neck, or those moments of reprieve kind of in the midst of it, which the last track on the album really is about, the Love and Time Restores track. So it kind of holds that in tandem, the like problems of the world, the darkness that's in the world, but also the daily pleasures that you experience.
Well, my impression of what the record is conveying related to grief and death is that we can't truly expect to experience and know the light unless there's some familiarity with darkness.
Yep. They give context to each other. They give definition to each other.
Context is a key word. In one of the tracks, track 7, Relative Heart, not that the bitters are a meaningless taste, but alone and out of context we will suffer waste.
Yeah. So that's kind of right to it, just like the darkness, the bitter things in life, like, are important. They teach us a lot, but in isolation, separate from their context and the larger scheme of things, are meaningless and will just lead us to endless suffering.
So the juxtaposition of these different moments, these different sounds, these different hues, the variegated hues, and the integration of these different aspects seems significant. you referred to grief, and right in the heart of the record, in tracks 4 and 5, I felt like a new kind of swagger comes in with Heavy as Humidity, and then it's even more kind of swanky by the time we get to Death Brings Renewal. And both of those tracks in the center of the record reference grief. In Heavy as Humidity, let it rise up to the surface, let the grief unfold and bloom, and then in Death Brings Renewal. Death, it brings renewal, but not without grief.
Right.
So what is the record suggesting about the relationship between death and grief and the potency of grief?
Yeah, I feel like, grief and death and darkness are like sort of like portals that we move through, and like we are transformed and changed as we move through them, and we sort of grow and learn and become better versions of ourselves when we move through those spaces. Makes us more empathetic and compassionate and understanding of other people's troubles.
Something that, on that note, something that really struck me as an interesting juxtaposition is this emphasis on letting and surrender in Heavy as Humidity. Let it rise up to the surface, let the grief unfold.
Yep.
And then the rebuke to John Lennon in War is Not Over.
Yeah.
There's a skepticism about passivity and this kind of wishful thinking.
Yeah.
War is over if you want it.
Right. I mean, I get the sentiment, but at the same time, like, if you lean too much into that, then you forget to take responsibility for the troubles of the world and, find your place in making it better.
Perhaps this is Carlyle's description again. I think the short description of the song War is Not Over that is on Bandcamp and elsewhere really accurately encapsulates what's going on here. A rebuke to the words of John Lennon, War is Not Over, challenges the idea that peace can be achieved through passivity or wishful thinking. And then this next sentence is, warm and grooving textures set the landscape for movement toward a more active and engaged pursuit of peace and positive change. So there's this celebration and encouragement of movement toward a more active and engaged pursuit. And then at other moments, there's a letting, a surrender, and a letting. There's a suggestion that grief will just unfold and bloom if one lets it.
Yep.
So I think that's just such an interesting juxtaposition. That this surrender is quite different from the passivity and wishful thinking.
Right.
Could you reflect a little bit more on these two different things?
Yeah. So. Yeah, the letting yourself experience grief and allowing it to move, surrendering into the feeling is, I feel like, necessary to really understand what the grief is trying to teach you. If you try to control it or push it back, then it's only going to fester and become more of a thing and not release, not move past you. So in the context of grief and sadness, you just have to kind of let it flow through you, and as it unfolds and blooms, it might bring tears, it might move your body in some way that allows you to release. But yeah, in the context of war and injustice and engaging with those problems of the world, it requires an active sort of presence. So I feel like it's context depending how you approach engaging with what you're experiencing.
I love the focus on movement and the body. You were referencing your focus on the tactile. Referencing the body, I think you just referred to digging one's heels in, and
Yeah.
that is an image, of course, in the title track.
Right.
And it strikes me as you're talking about it that sometimes willful gestures that we humans stubbornly going to dig my heels in can be the things that impede the movement, the flowing movement,
Yeah.
and the growth
Yeah.
that the record is otherwise inviting us to let happen.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a trajectory in the like way those tracks unfold and the kind of sequence of those
Yeah.
ideas. Because we get pulled down in the darkness in the first track, and then the Friction and Demand is track 3, and it's sort of about that feeling of like being pulled into the darkness, but trying to push back against it, and like the grief that creates, and the sort of friction and stuckness that can create. And then the next 2 tracks are more about the feeling of grief and just kind of describing it, and that just allowing yourself to lean into and understand and move through, as I keep saying.
And letting it rise up in track 4, which is, of course, the opposite movement to the descent that we have in track 1.
Yeah, it's the first moment of like, okay, we're in it, we're like feeling the darkness and seeing the darkness, and then the first moment we're like, okay, we need to like open up and allow ourselves to re-emerge because we're not stuck here forever.
Yeah. The record doesn't seem to be chastising us humans for demanding friction or for our resistance.
Yeah, it's inevitable. I mean, I deal with it a lot, struggle with it a lot, just kind of part of my, how I have to engage with grief. It's like part of the process. The last track on the album was, for a minute, going to be the name of the album, Love in Time Restores, because I feel like those are kind of the 2 ends of the spectrum on the album. I feel like the Friction and Demand gets to the heart of the album a little bit better, the kind of the meat of it.
That's really
But the kind of the takeaway that I'm hoping people will, bring with them after they finish listening is the closing track's message, Love in Time Restores.
I can see how both of those would work very well.
Yeah, I kept going back and forth.
How did you choose in the end?
Well, I asked a lot of the other bandmates and got their input, and then just reflected for a while, and I felt like it made more sense to, name it based on kind of the meat of the album rather than just the like tail end message.
It makes me think that the only way out is through.
Yeah.
And so there's no bypassing this friction.
Exactly. Yep, that definitely gets to it.
It struck me when I was looking at the list of what instruments you're playing on which songs.
Yep.
You're playing piano on tracks 1, 2, 3, 4, and then also 7.
Actually, 4 is Peter Breen for most of the song, although it doesn't say in the description. I do play piano in the ending, the outro section. But
and then you're playing auxiliary percussion on 7, 8, 9.
Yep, on the last 3. Yep.
So that struck me as interesting. There's references in the one sheet again to precision and phrase.
I think that's another Carlisle quote. Carlisle's a great writer and does a lot of good write-ups for my stuff.
It's very good and accurate. The music exhibits exhaustive precision and delightful variety. The precision of having just focusing on the prominence of the piano in the opening tracks, and then there's this the auxiliary percussion comes in at the end. Perhaps we could begin to think about the sonic journey that the record takes us on through the lens of thinking, well, why are the tracks that have this instrumentation all together at the beginning and the tracks that have that instrumentation?
Sure. Yeah. I feel like sonically the music reflects the lyrical content and the kind of the message of the album. At the beginning, we're being drawn down, take me down to the bottom of the oceans, kind of like the core line of that song, pulling us down into the belly of the beast. But then before we really get pulled down, the second track is like kind of a lighter texture instrumental track that's like, I don't know, a palate cleanser, sort of a breath above the surface of the water before we truly get pulled down.
It would be remiss of us not to reference the two saxophonists
Definitely, yeah.
across the record, but
Yeah, fantastic players.
Anna and Thomas?
Yep, Anna Doldy and Thomas Strauman on alto sax and tenor sax, respectively.
and they're really showcased on track 2.
Yep, I just kind of let them run wild. We recorded all the other parts together, just kind of setting the foundation for it, and then left a lot of space for them to improvise a melody over the top of it. And it's pretty much a one take, just let them play through it and see what came out kind of organically. And that's where that one came from.
The other track where I especially love what the two saxophonists are doing is Hollowed Bones.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites of theirs, for sure.
The cacophonous, Carlyle describes the
Yep.
cacophonous sax. After each verse, my sense of self distorted, into your mind I am fed, and then
Yep.
the two saxophones convey
Yep. Kind of that distorting feeling of like,
Yeah.
being pulled into somebody else's expectations or needs of you.
I feel that the record is inviting listeners with the lyrics. We go on the journey that the lyrics are inviting us to go on.
Yep.
We find ourselves reflecting on what others' minds are doing, the callous minds,
Yep.
and also reflecting on what my own mind is doing. We're encouraged to cultivate certain self-reflexivity.
Yep, definitely.
Could you reflect a little bit more on that? How
Yeah.
the record is inviting us to observe what different minds are doing?
Sure. So that's kind of the meat of the album, kind of delving into that that darker space that we all are inevitably going to move through in our lives. And then, moving through it, kind of trying to release from it, and then the last 3 tracks on the album are kind of like the takeaway as you start to emerge from a period of grief or a period of depression or anxiety or whatever it is that one is struggling with. Invites us to kind of find some takeaways, find some messages, find some meaning from it, and then take action in some way.
There's a lot of references to the poor health of the various minds, whether it's my own
Sure.
mind or others.
Yep, definitely reflecting on mental illness in a way I definitely personally struggle with.
And the pervasiveness, I think, of the
Yeah. Just how widespread it is in the
Absolutely.
modern day, for sure.
Yeah.
Depression and anxiety are deeply a part of my daily movements, daily existence. Seems
Even
like
knots in
that's
my
pretty
gut.
common these days.
And understandably,
Yeah.
even knots in my guts, I am sickly disease. So there's a sense of there's an awareness of ill health, and then there's also, and it's I think related to the seeing what lies in the minds of the callous heads.
Yeah, that's sort of a reference to, people in power who have sort of a dark, twisted perspective. And their way of being will affect us and have influence on our lives. That's just a part of it.
And that never goes away. In track 9, which is the most hopeful track, where we're kind of basking in the sun, so to speak, still there. That's where it explicitly highlights we can't ignore all that is broken. Laws written for the white, rich, and powerful.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of the tie between the beginning and the end of the album, sort of sewing that thread that we can't avoid it, we can't ignore it. Yeah, those people exist and they have influence on the world, and we have to address that injustice.
Yep. And this is how the war is not over ties in.
Yep.
I think the precision, the musical precision, and how carefully crafted everything is, fits with this demand for clarity, clear-sightedness. This is the level of dysfunction and the scary mental illness of those in power who dig their heels in
Yeah.
and are willfully determined not to witness how
Right.
they are.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a lack of self-awareness or a lack of self-care or something. I don't know quite how to name it, but
But the music knows. I think your music
Sure.
knows.
yeah, sometimes I have a hard time in just like daily conversation, like knowing quite how to speak my mind or say what I really want to say. So this album is like a very slow and careful process of trying to find the words to say what I'm trying to say. It was like a 3-4 year process of
How did the words
piecing it all together.
emerge in relation to the music? What came
That's
with that?
that's a great question. I feel like every song is different. Everything emerges in its own way. Sometimes it's just like kind of a stream of consciousness, both the music and the words come together in the same moment and just kind of happens of its own accord. And then I just have to be able to remember it somehow. That was kind of the case for Hollowed Bones. I just was playing guitar one day and just kind of stream of consciousness played that track or the instrumental version of it, and then had just written something earlier that day in my notebook. I was like, oh, these two go together, and kind of made sense of it that way. Other times they're totally separate. I'll write the words just as a poem and not really thinking about it as a song yet, and then we'll years later find a piece of music that I'm writing that, oh, these two are supposed to be together. They're talking about the same thing or have the same emotional content.
It's such an interesting fullness to the moment in the opening track where we have the lyric, the theatre of the absurd. I've spent more time in the belly of the beast, but we're all caught in this theatre of the absurd. And it's playful, joyful, but at the same time, kind of staring the monster
Yeah.
in the eye. That's a really interesting moment, and the fact that we get there so early on in the records.
Sure.
With we follow the descending piano, we let ourselves go down to the bottom, and then we find ourselves gleefully almost not turning away from the terrors.
Yeah, that's kind of the message that I think that track is really pointing to, that like, looking away, turning your head aside doesn't actually do anything about it, and actually staring it down and seeing it for what it is gives
There's a
us more
power in
potential
that.
to confront it.
At what point did you become aware that Theatre of the Absurd would be the opening track?
Think for a second. I feel like as soon as I knew what songs were going to be on the album, as soon as I had the collection of songs, they pretty quickly just sort of fell into a clear order. Because as we've been talking about, it's kind of a story arc, and the pieces just kind of laid themselves out for me. I guess the only one that I had to like deliberately place is the instrumental track, Pastel Sky, which a little bit thematically didn't fit, but then I realized it's just sort of like the breath of fresh air before you truly descend. Just an opportunity to, I don't know, warm the feeling a little bit, so it's not just like we delve right into the darkness without any acknowledgement of the other side of the spectrum.
We've been talking a lot about the the journey, the trajectory, the narrative arc. Alongside that forward movement, which the record invites us to let happen, there's also focus on the cyclical nature of things.
Totally.
And in Death Brings Renewal, all falls apart, and to the start, I repeat. Is that correct?
Yep.
And similarly, in Hollowed Bones, back to where we start is where we end. And also in the title track, Alone as I Began.
Yep. Lots of circles. Lots of even there is a forward movement in the album, but you could think of it as just a full circle. You go down, you come back up. You go down, you come back up. There's just sort of a pull and a push and a cycle at play. I feel like that's kind of how I experience time, honestly.
Absolutely.
I experience time in a cyclical way, and things are always coming back and returning. And yeah, that's definitely always reflected in my music, and lyrically comes up a lot for whatever reason.
And then in the title, though, of the final track, which is very much the destination of the record.
Sure.
Love in time restores. There is this sense, I think, that yes, there's this. We're going in circles and moving in cycles, and yet love seems to be, if we let it.
Yeah.
If we actively let it, as opposed to passively, wishfully thinking something, then love seems to govern these cycles.
And also, maybe also allows for just a general consistent rise, where there's circles and there's constant returns, but perhaps there is an overall lift upward if we lean into love.
Yeah, there's a real sense of hope, I think, alongside the willingness, and perhaps because of the willingness, to be in the belly of the beast, and to stare the terrors in the eye. Yeah,
definitely hoping that that's felt in the album as you reach the end of it, that the darkness is not all encompassing, that we can still be hopeful in the midst of it.
Something else that Carlisle highlights quite wonderfully in the band bio is the shape-shifting of the band itself.
Yeah, definitely.
And how, in its full form, as kind of manifested on the record itself, we have, for example, the 2 saxophones and the 3 backing vocalists and so on.
Very big ensemble.
But we can expect to witness all kinds of manifestations of Willow Waters and Earth Tones.
Yep. Depending on the set, depending on the size of the stage, might be a different assembly from show to show. And there's also kind of you won't necessarily hear it on the album because it's well defined, but there's an improvisatory element to the music as well. So every time a song is played, there's a fluidity within the music as well, from track to track. Every time you see a live show, it'll be a slightly different, fabrication of it.
And so on Thursday, the 4th of May, at the Cedar Cultural Center, you have a nice big stage.
Yep.
Could you give us a sense of what we will encounter on Thursday, the 4th of May, at the Cedar Cultural Center?
I'm very excited about this show. It'll be the first show with the full Earth Tones ensemble.
Everyone who plays on the record will be...
Everyone who plays on the record, except there will be Maddie Tees on bass instead of Rye Hayes. Rye Hayes can't make it for the show. We'll be sorely missed, but very grateful to Maddie for filling in on the bass.
All the artwork is Rye Hayes too.
Yes, that's right. Yep, Rye did the artwork for the album as well. Kind of construction paper art. They had posted some stuff on Instagram that I was really fond of, and especially after they mentioned that they can't be on the show, and just wanted to have them involved as much as possible.
What time is the show?
Doors are at 7. Bad Posture Club will start at 7:30. Roll on from there. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks very much for going on this journey with us through the new record from Willow Waters and the Earth Tones. I've been Simon Calder. This is Back to the City. We'll be back next Thursday.